So, hello. Today we will speak with Comrade from USA, Comrade Haz, who make a YouTube channel Infrared. Hello, Comrade. And maybe I will. I watched some of your videos, and I saw that sometimes or often you speak about the socialist bloc, especially about the Soviet Union and East Germany. But do you know the history of Polish communist movement?
Um, I don't. I'm not very familiar with the history of the movement. I just have a brief familiarity with some details of the Polish communist state history throughout the Cold War, leading to the 80s and so on.
Uh, yes, because I wanted to start a discussion from this subject because I think that for you and for the conversation which is now in American YouTube, the question of the communism and the patriotism, and also your discussion with Jason Unruh, I think that the history of the communist movement in Poland is very interesting. So maybe briefly I will say some words about this. So before Second World War, we had one party which was a section of the Third International. It was Communist Party of Poland. It was combative party, but relatively small party. It was delegalized party, and there was a lot of persecution. But this party was small because of the sectarian position in the many question. For example, the members of this party wanted to make Poland the Republic of the Soviet Union. And it was after Poland gained independence, and it's not worked in Poland because most of the Polish workers wanted to independent Polish state, and they preferred the Polish way to socialism, not to be part of the Soviet Union. And Comrade Stalin, he dissolved this party because of many reasons. It is another conversation why the Communist Party was dissolved. But in the time of the Second World War, there was constructed new party which was built by the members of the ancient Communist Party. But this party is the name Polish Workers' Party, and this party was fighting against the occupation. And this party very quickly became mass party, and it was party which after the Second World War built socialism in Poland. We in this question we have two kind of parties. One party is sectarian. Second party used this patriotic question and very quickly became a mass party and changed the society. From this perspective, I think that the discussion which you have, for example, with Jason Unruh, the strategy of Polish Workers' Party is better than sectarian strategy of this communist party which existed before. But after the history of Poland, it was history that the counter-revolution in the socialist bloc started in Poland, and it started in Poland because this strategy of Polish Workers' Party to organize mass movement and take a power was good to take a power. But after, when there was a question building socialism, they didn't use Marxist theory well. For example, they didn't fight with Catholic Church. They stopped the collectivization, and also there was this patriotic question. It was good when it was against German, but in 1970s and 1980s, this patriotism started to be something reactionary because it was anti-Soviet. So it is something which I wanted to start. I don't know. What do you think about this?
So the Polish communist patriotism was anti-Soviet.
No. In the time of in the time of the Second World War, it was against Germans,
Yeah,
against Nazi. But the problem is that the Polish Workers' Party attacked. When you take newspapers of the Polish Workers' Party, they attacked German like a nation, not Nazi like
yeah.
ideology of the. And it was the time when in Poland. In the time of war, there are the 6 million of Poles who died in the occupation, and every Pole have somebody in the family who was killed by the Germans. So for building the mass movement, this easy propaganda that we are against Germans, we want to independent state, and also we want the social reform. They didn't talk about the communism. It's Stalin who decided that communism in Poland don't work well because because for example, in the time of the existing of Communist Party of Poland, there was all this anti-communist propaganda. They accused the member of the Communist Party of Poland that they are the agent of Moscow, agent of Soviet Union. And they didn't want to discuss with this, and they said yes, for us, our homeland is Soviet Union, and we want to make Poland the Republic of the Soviet Union. For me, for the politically it was good, but it was not something which worked to be by mass movement. So for building mass movement, it's better to try to listen what is what workers want. And there was something that the party wanted something, and the workers, they are not connection. And it is something that I think that it is problem of many Marxists from internet, also maybe me, and also in the YouTube, in American YouTube, that one thing that is what is the real feelings that workers want today, and the second, what is the offer of the people who, for example, say we need to fight for the giving all the American land to the Native Americans. So maybe from the moral perspective, it is something which is just, but it will be never something which you organize the workers in the USA. So I think that in this discussion which you may have with Jason Unruh, you are realist, and you are bigger chance to build movement, because from this other perspective, third world Maoism, it's not working.
So this basic distinction, right, between the real situation and what's considered ideologically correct or moral, you can actually find beginning with Marx and Engels, even before this mass movement. This distinction is basically the point of materialist dialectic, right? If one's morality is at odds with the real material reality, then one must rethink what the real implications of one morality is. I'll give you an example in the context of Marxism, Leninism. So with Stalin's his distrust toward other communist parties, independent communist parties in general, taking place in other nations, it stems from the distinction created by the Lenin, by the Bolsheviks, right, between the democratic revolution and the communist revolution, right? Now, The democratic revolution for Lenin, right, was something actually objective. It's part of material reality. It's something that happens in the material. It's a realist view of the reality, right? Like the small peasants have a problem with the landowners, have a problem with aristocracy, with feudalism, whatever. And this is the basis for objective democratic revolution. So communists, they can be hands off even, and it will still happen somehow, right? Lenin's theory is that communists are the best equipped to lead this revolution, this democratic revolution. So this is why he combined the workers and the peasants, the dictatorship of the workers and peasants, because for Lenin, the bourgeoisie cannot lead democratic revolution in the Russian Empire. So up toward Stalin, when Stalin was fighting against his own party bureaucracy when he was in the 30s and when he assumed power, and even later through the 40s, Stalin's whole goal was basically to reduce the power of the Communist Party and the communist ideologists and so on, and strengthen the more objective and realist structures of Soviet state. Because for Stalin, state was not just a subjective reality of ideology and morality and so on. It had an objective, it followed objective laws of history and objective reality. So Stalin wanted to reduce the power of the Communist Party to a more spiritual guide of the state. He didn't want the state to be synonymous with the Communist Party. So I think this is where the Marxist view contrasts with idealism and liberalism and even fascism, which is its recognition that statehood and revolution, social revolution, has an objective reality, right? Communists must submit themselves to the laws of social revolution and cannot dictate the terms of this revolution. Like, we may arrive at the idea that this is more moral or more ideologically correct, but if it comes at the expense of the material reality, it's not correct. Now, with regard to Stalin's distrust of the Polish communism, I read this in the context of Stalin's distrust of, most importantly, of the Chinese Communist Party, of Mao, and so on and so on. And the reason is because for Stalin, the Communist Party was the kind of ultimate spiritual guide of, it's the highest form of state power, more or less, right? And to possess, it's almost like a church, sacred kind of church, right? If this is being reproduced in Poland and China, he was suspicious of this because he did not trust that they would be able to reconcile the Communist Party with this objective national social reality. So in a sense, Stalin did not trust other national communist parties or civilizational communist parties because he himself did not fully arrive at a theory about the relationship between the Communist Party and the People's Democracy or the Popular Front. He just took it for granted, right? It was almost like how should I put it? It's almost like a prohibited reality. Like, we have, yes, the Soviet Communist Party, but its origins are too sacred and mysterious to be directly reproduced in other countries. So we will guide the world revolution in Moscow, and you will, in other countries, you, instead of arriving at your own independent communist party, you will just obey the objective social laws of history of the democratic revolution, more or less.
Yes, but I think that there wasn't one Stalin. You have one Stalin in 1930s who are in the charge of the Soviet Union, and this problem which existed in the Communist Party of Poland existed in other section of the Third International. And in the time of the Second World War, the Soviet Union and the communists from the Third International, they decided that this strategy that failed because in every European countries the fascism take power, and these communist parties were very, very weak. So we have one strategy in 1930s where the communist parties have to obey the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and make exactly the same thing like in the Soviet Union, but the strategy in the 1944 1945 is different. This strategy for the Polish Workers' Party was different. That there are in the leadership of this Polish Workers' Party, there are the communists who wanted in every article make citation of Stalin, and Stalin said no. Don't do this, because if you all the time you will say you are Stalinist, you support Soviet Union, you want collectivization, and you need to be party which is based in your culture, in your country, because it will be better to build a mass movement and popularity for this. So there is one strategy before the Second World War, and the creation of the countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, etc. Is different, and it's my remark.
So what was different after the Second World War?
Because all the Europe was occupied by the Nazis, and because there was a collaboration of the elites in the occupied zone, the Polish bourgeoisie, Polish aristocracy, they collaborated with the Nazis. And the reality of the occupation was anti-workers. So all the trade unions were delegalized. If you are fighting against your bourgeoisie, the Germans can kill you. So it was very easy to make a movement which was in one side, it was the liberation of the nation, and in the other side it was the movement who wanted to expropriate the bourgeoisie and the aristocracy. And because it was something common to all these Eastern Europe countries, it was very easy to build mass movement or the working people and say all these people who are in the charge, Nazis and the collaborators from the Polish bourgeoisie, we have to kick them out and build socialism. The difference, the biggest difference is that in the time of the war, they didn't make citation from Hegel or Marx or something like this. The agitation was very, very easy. They are the traitors, they are the capitalist Nazis, we have to fight with them. That's all. And before the strategy of the Communist Party of Poland, it was the normal strategy of communists who tried to make all this Marxist propaganda, education, teach about what is the Marxist economy and stuff like this.
So just to simplify, it's basically that the revolution had an objective basis, not subjective ideological basis, objective basis in the situation. But my theory, my interpretation of Marxism Leninism is that, in a sense, all social revolution, whether in a period of wartime occupation by a foreign power or not, must be patriotic, because the objective social revolution, which is the contradiction and antagonism between establishments, aristocrats, landowners, and basically social parasites, right? And the small proprietor peasantry, small petite bourgeoisie, democratic petite bourgeoisie, as Lenin put it, that is an objective revolution. That's not that does not need to be initiated through proletarian consciousness. You don't need proletarian consciousness to have populism, so to speak, right? Populism will be there. So if the communists are not the ones leading, making sense of the populism, then someone else will. Fascist will, far right will, and so on and so on. But the populism, so to speak, right, which is a contradiction between the countryside, the national basis, if you will, and this aristocrats and establishment, that's a contradiction that will be there regardless of ideology. It's an objective contradiction. So that's why during war, it's the reason you can interpret it was easy for communists to seize power after the war, because it was very clear that the interests of the ruling class were anti-patriotic, right? They could clearly show how to be a true patriot, one must be a communist, right? But my view is simply that this is holding true even outside of a situation of wartime occupation. It's a patriotic thing to fight your establishment. You can say they are removed from the real basis and roots of the country, and they're urbanized, and they're too liberalized and artificial, and so on and so on, and that there is an authentic countryside of the people of the soil, and so on and so on, that communists must make sense of. And to me, this is what Lenin precisely did in the Russian Empire, right? Russia at the time was not occupied by a foreign power. But whether the Bolsheviks didn't admit this, and one of the reasons they did not admit this was because the European bourgeois nation state did not apply to the conditions of Russia, Russian people, and Russian Empire. But the Bolsheviks, for example, in contrast to the Mensheviks, were seen as more patriotic, just in the sense of more earthly, more related to the Russian peasant, more Russian, more down to earth, down to the soil, right? Because they represented the interests, the populist interests of the. This was also coming from the socialist revolutionaries and their tradition as well. But the left socialist revolutionaries are the ones who joined the Bolsheviks in the first place after the seizure of power. But it's always important that communists must be the leading force of their own civilization's inner objective striving. There's an objective striving, objective law of social revolution in each and every civilization. And to me, the job of communists is to lead this, but not dictate the terms of the revolution, but lead this revolution, clarify it. Because here's where communism becomes important to me, is, for example, dialectics, right? If one falls into the error of one-sidedness, you will not be able to successfully lead a social revolution in your country. Trump in the United States failed to lead this social revolution the popular movement against the establishment, because he was in bed with the ruling class anyway, but he completely failed. He couldn't understand the necessary contradictions. For example, that yes, while the establishment must be overthrown, there must be some kind of alternative, and so on and so on. So to me, communists should make the case that the right-wing populists and fascists and so on, they're fake patriots, because they will fail. They will, just like how in the aftermath of World War II, if you were a kind of fascist or right-winger, you're not a patriot, right? You're going against the interests of your own people. Just like that, communists should always be the ones to say others will fail to lead this revolution.
I think that in this question of Russian Revolution, you can be right, but you are not right when you spoke about Lenin. I will explain. You could be right because the the February Revolution, we could consider like a revolution which was a little bit inspired by the patriotism, but because there was all this question that the monarchy in Russia, it was the German monarchy, that the all this Nikolai Romanov, his wife, when in the time of the war, she became one of the leader of the Russia, and because of her romance with Rasputin, the dynasty, German dynasty in the Russia, was something very unpopular. And the February Revolution, it was spontaneous movement, not organized by Lenin, not organized by Menshevik, but it was spontaneous movement starting by the strike of the women, which in a few days became a revolution, and the Tsarism was destroyed. So in this perspective, when we have Russian people which are ruled by the German dynasty, and there was a lot of hatred against this dynasty, it could be right. But the position of Lenin was different. Lenin, in the first days of the war, he said that the position of the Russian communists should be that our enemy is our government. We need to fight that the Russia in this war will fail. And also this split in the government of the Soviets in the time of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, because it was the coalition.
Yeah,
of
it's okay because I'm familiar with the history, right? I know this history, okay? But you have misunderstood me.
Yes.
So you're talking about the European-inspired nationalism within Russia, specifically in the context of the First World War. Of course, Lenin is opposed to this. As I said, the European nation state does not satisfy the real depth and basis of the Russian civilization. Lenin, the February Revolution was not more of an urban bourgeois revolution, right? It wasn't the revolution of peace, land, and bread. Now we talk about peace, which was a context of opposing World War One. But what about land and bread? Well, land and bread is precisely an appeal to the Russian peasant majority within the Russian Empire. And this is what the February Revolution was unable to deliver upon. The February Revolution was not authentically patriotic in the sense of the Russian patriotism of World War II, because it did not have its basis in the Russian people, the real peasants, right? It was trying to adopt the foreign model of the European nation state nationalism. Now, Lenin did not talk about the deep roots of Russian civilization and so on, because the language with which to articulate this did not yet exist. But if we believe that Stalin was the most faithful student of Lenin, then it's very clear that the Bolsheviks' grounding in the authentically Russian civilization, like even before Peter the Great, as Stalin put it. Stalin viewed Peter the Great as a westernizer, a Germanizer. He wanted to, in a sense, return to Ivan the Terrible. So Stalin did view that there was a unique grounding in a deeper Russian civilization that's not reducible to European nation state. I need to make it very clear, because on the internet and on Twitter, there has been this huge slander of our position on the question of patriotism. It has nothing to do with the context of World War I. During World War I, the nationalisms of World War I and this so-called patriotism was, as Lenin pointed out, a war of the imperialist bourgeoisie. It's not just an ideological talking point. It was objectively the fact. It wasn't a reflection of some authentic reality of the country in these countries. It was a war that was started from the top down, right, by the oligarchies and establishments and so on and so on. So it wasn't like a populist war in a sense, right? So I need to make very clear, yes, Lenin was against what he called the social patriots and the chauvinists and so on and so on. But during that time, that was the context of World War One, right? In terms of the unique realities of the Russian civilization, to be against that war was to be a true patriot in the Stalinist sense of the word, right? Because this war was initiated, started, and fought on the terms of the Europeanized Russian elites at the expense of the broad Russian majority. So I think that's why I need to intervene and say there's a misunderstanding. Of course, Lenin was not explicitly some kind of particularly some kind of patriot. But as we see from the consequences of his unique discovery, specifically through the Stalin years leading to the Great Patriotic War, he was authentically a Russian Marxist, in contrast to the Mensheviks and the rest who were just Europeanized.
I think that in the national question, it was the Lenin who learned from Stalin that the Stalin was the specialist of the national question, and from the Russian perspective, it is very important to understand the difference between the patriotism of the oppressed nation, like Poles, like Georgians, like Jews, and other nations, which was a part of the Russian Empire, and the patriotism of the Russian, which was and it was contradictory. That I think that Lenin thought that in the same time the patriotism of the oppressed nation, it is something which is good, and the patriotism of Russian, it is bad, it is reactionary.
But that's only because, and again, during the context of that time, patriotism would mean war with other countries, right? Now, Lenin was trying to say that when an oppressed nation is fighting a war of liberation, that's different from an inter-imperialist war between oppressor imperialist nations. So that's the point he was trying to make. When I say that every civilization or nation, communist, must be patriotic, I'm not saying they must advocate for wars. I'm saying Lenin's position was authentically patriotic. He was against the war and he was fighting for a civil war. All I insist upon is the fact that the civil war Lenin was insisting to be fought against the bourgeoisie, the landowners, and effectively the establishment was an authentically patriotic struggle. It was a patriotic struggle waged on behalf of the authentic representatives of the Russian civilization, the Russian peasantry, the Russian people, against an establishment that ceased to authentically represent it. Now, this much is made very overtly clear with Mao by the time we arrive at Mao Zedong, right? But it's not yet explicit in Lenin. It's more or less explicit in Stalin when he said that the task of communists worldwide is to be patriots for their country and seize the majority, win the favor of the majority within their respective countries. But in Lenin's time, patriotism, as he used it, was referring to the national fervor of waging war. It wasn't referring to like a populistic uprising against establishment that's formulated on patriotic terms. It's really as simple as that. It's like, to me, it's about what is the meaning of patriotism. Patriotism does not mean, it doesn't mean patriotism, even within oppressor nations, is how you accentuate the contradiction within the oppressor nation itself. To me, the alternative to this is a very vain, condescending, hypocritical, and bourgeois, moralistic position, according to which, people in the oppressor nation must have guilt and must cease to have pride, and they must kind of you will never win. You will never win a significant minority of people within oppressor nations if you operate under those terms. You have to formulate that it is in the authentic interests of the country, which it is already in the United States, for example. Anti-war sentiment is populist even before communists have to say anything, right? Why are we going and fighting? Why do we have military bases around the world? Why do we? It's not in the interest of our country. To be a patriot means to oppose war, right? In this country. So that's really my view. The Marxist dialectical position comes with the view, and this is my position, that if you believe your morality is correct, imperialist war is wrong, oppression is wrong, subjugation of others is wrong, you not only must believe it is wrong, you also must believe that in objective material reality, the forces of laws of history affirm this. There must be a unity between the subjective and the objective. If you cannot have the faith that the law of history is behind you, and it is in the objective material interest of a given country that's harmonious with your morality, this leads to subjectivism, idealism, and ultimately liberalism.
I think that this position works when there are the guys like Caleb Maupin, who in the same time when he wants to build the communist patriotic movement, he collaborated with countries which are attacked by the United States. He collaborated with Russia Today, with Iran, and countries like this. So I can understand, because you know the leftist movement which we try to build in Poland. In the last months, we printed one leaflet against that occupation Poland by the U.S. Army. Second leaflet was against the television TVN, which is proprietor of Discovery, also American. Also, we were against the buying U.S. tanks Abrams. So our fight for socialism is connected with also anti-imperialism, and in the Poland specific, it is anti-imperialism, it is anti-American imperialism, because we are very, very dependent. So all one day when for example there will be international meeting and there will be communists from every country, and there will be communists from country which are occupied by the USA, they will be not happy when the communists from USA came with the flag which they hate, because the flag, maybe not in Poland, because in Poland the US soldiers didn't kill anybody, but in Iran, or I don't know, other countries, there are a lot of people who died because of American imperialism, because of sanction. And
Well, you see, I specifically know about Iranian sentiment on this question. The victims of U.S. imperialism don't care about the flag; they care about what it means. And if American patriots are fighting in anti-imperialist solidarity with them, and actually, I mean, what helps them better, right? We winning our country and putting an end to the policies and the military aggression, or us abandoning the war and not being able to us abandoning the flag and not being able to make any difference about the sanctions and so. I mean, there was many anti-imperialists who were ecstatic about Donald Trump being elected because they thought that Trump would be a new clean slate to start new relations with the U.S. and lift aggressive sanctions. They were wrong, but that's what the impression of some countries was. Of course, who does North Korea prefer in power? Is it Trump or is it Biden? The American flag is a symbol of genocide, in a sense, in North Korea. But that doesn't stop them from being able to prefer Trump to Biden because Trump did not want a military solution to the conflict on the Korean Peninsula. So now, I don't know which communist parties directly use the flag of their country. I don't think American Communist Party would have to use the flag of the United States in an international meeting of communist parties. I think it would just use the flag of its communist party. But the point is to give new meaning to the flag, not simply take it's like what matters more, the material reality or the ideal symbol, right? For as long as the symbol of American flag represents American imperialism, okay. But if people are struggling to give it a different meaning, I don't see what the issue would be. Now, to clarify my position, I fervently, just so there's no confusion, I think Polish communists must be more anti-American. They're not anti-American enough. They need to be extreme and more like Iranian anti-Americans, burn the flag and so on and so on. Anti-Americanism in Europe is good. I want to see more anti-Americanism in Europe personally. I am happy when I see anti-Americanism in Europe and throughout the world at large, because when they're burning the American flag, when they're speaking against America, I view them as speaking against my own ruling class here in the United States. Because it's the ruling class of the United States which has its power secured and consolidated by having its tentacles across the world. Its influence in Poland is the same as its influence here, right? To the extent that it's powerful in Poland, our ruling class is powerful here. So if Polish patriots are anti-American, I salute them, right? I consider them, that's to me true international solidarity. So I understand there can be confusion when it comes to the use of symbols, but we have to focus on the material reality of the symbol. What does it mean, right? American patriots they may use the American flag, but when they use the American flag, they're sending a different message. Their message is basically that we are the authentic representatives of American people, or we want to be the authentic representatives of this country, its history. Its history and its civilization and reality and so on and so on. And this has been the position of the Popular Front since the 1930s. Whether your country's anti-imperialist or not, it's a given that communists must be... Sorry, whether your country's fighting a war of anti-imperialism or not, the only chance communists have to seize power in respective countries is to be the best patriots. But remember, patriotism does not mean doing whatever is in the interests of your ruling class or your establishment or your government, or even doing what's going to, in the short term, increase the standard of living of your population. It means to, in the long term, represent the authentic interests of your country. My view is humanist. I think as a humanist, as human beings, our interests are for humanity as a whole, right? And human beings have different nations and countries and civilizations. And each one of those civilizations is based on our common humanity. It's my view.
So I would like to ask you, I watched your video about the Communist Party of the USA, and I can say that the Communist Party of Poland, there are very similar guys for this from the USA, and it is not compliment. So the question is why the Communist Party, which before Second World War was something very strong in USA and something combative, today is something ridicule, and why?
Well, it has to do, to me, with a misinterpretation of the theory of the Popular Front. So our Communist Party in the United States thinks that the lesson from the Popular Front is that it must tail the Democrats because the Democrats represent the authentic people, nation, and so on and so on. And that popular front means all of this identity politics and this intersectionality, this an anti-Marxist theory that came out of our universities, that this represents popular front. But they don't understand, and maybe this has to do with the rejection of Mao Zedong thought or something else, but the Communist Party in USA doesn't understand there's a difference between authentic popular forces and the apparent representative of the popular forces, the establishment. They don't have a good theory of the conflict between masses and establishments is the main issue of so to me, for example, I agree with theory of the popular front, but in the United States, to me, this must be the context of the Communist Party should align itself with anti-establishment populist forces like the People's Party or other kind of third-party initiatives, something like that, right? It shouldn't be the so-called representative, because the so-called representative can enter into contradiction with the real masses, of course, right? To me, it really is boiled down to this. Our Communist Party is part of American establishment. It's tied to the corporate, liberal, Democrat establishment, and it confuses this with some kind of authentic historical progress, right? It's too afraid to go down to the soil of American people and define itself on this basis, because it views, well, if we go down to the people without our political correctness and our universities and our cities and establishments, oh, the people are reactionary, the people are ignorant, the people are backward. But this stems from a lack of it stems from an idealistic bourgeois kind of view that they don't have to learn from the people must only learn from them. And also, if, for example, the people are wrong, they have bad views on abortion and other gay marriage, whatever other kinds of issues, if you are ultimately correct, you must have the internal confidence that you can persuade them or put it into terms that make sense to them. The minute you give up on the people is the minute you create a completely bankrupt position of bourgeois elitism, right? When you say, oh, there's nothing we can do, the people are backward and we are correct. One cannot be a communist if they have this view. You must do self-criticism and ask, why do I fail to persuade the masses? Keep having self-criticism until one is correct. Don't ever say just the people are irredeemable and stupid and we must strengthen corporate establishment America in its anti-democratic struggle against the people because they know better. You know, it's really disgusting. Here in the United States, we have Silicon Valley, Amazon, the Democrats, this new vaccine mandate bullshit. We have a crackdown, new kind of tyranny against the majority, the popular majority. And the so-called communists are in favor of it because they think, oh, the people are too stupid and too backward, so we have to trust the elites to do the correct thing. What then is left of the legacy of this is a new kind of fascism. It's a new kind of return of feudalism, right? The whole point of democratic revolutions, the bourgeois democratic revolutions, was a fundamental faith, trust in the people. If this is gone, the communists in the United States will be accessories to the rise of some new politically correct fascism.
And what is your strategy for the next 5 years? Do you want to build the party, or do you want to present your to election, or what, or make revolution?
To me, there's only one communist party in the United States, and I still want to struggle using my media platform to seize hegemony over the Communist Party. If I fail, if we fail to make inroads into that party, then my theory is the party form itself of a communist party is obsolete. There can be no communist party, and we should simply be in a populist party like the People's Party and go from there. But I don't believe that. I still believe in a party form, but it's almost a theological question at this point, right? It's like with Catholicism, there is one church, right? There can be multiple churches. In Protestantism, they say no, there can be multiple churches, or the church is inside the heart, so on and so on. But I still believe in one communist party. I believe in a communist party. I don't believe I can make a new party because we have millions and millions of parties. Sorry, not millions, it's exaggeration, but we have several parties in the United States. They're all sects, right? So to me, there's one communist party, and for as long as there's one communist party, unless the communists see theoretically, we can influence the party, we can make inroads, right? Because according to its own program and rules and protocols internally, we won't violate the rules by doing this. But if they suddenly just drastically change, they will be destroying their own party. And I actually think Communist Party USA is going to, at this road, the people joining it are going to destroy the party because, the new idea is that United States should not be recognized as a country. United States, according to these new people joining the party, is a force of occupation against the indigenous tribes, and there's no such thing as United States. Well, the name of the party is the Communist Party of USA. So what will become of a party when it adopts this line that all land in USA must be returned to indigenous minority? It's the party will have no future, right? Because the Communist Party USA can't be the leader of the indigenous. It's the Communist Party USA. Why should indigenous accept this party as their leader? They won't, right? So they're leading it down a road of destruction, is what I see. But I want to do my best to stop that. If the party is destroyed, then the goal will then be reconstitute the Communist Party some kind of way.
And what is your analysis of China, DPRK, Cuba, and Vietnam?
Specifically, I view China as the Hegelian idea of world spirit. The world spirit shifts to different countries, right? Hegel in his time thought Germany was the place of the world spirit, right? You can maybe say in 20th century, America was the world spirit, right? It was the number one driving force of modernization in the world. It was the leader of the global market and the global economy and so on and so on. And it was the land of the future, right? But today, this has shifted to China. China is today the site of the world spirit. China is the future. It's not the Chinese geopolitical strategy to replace America as an imperialist power, but to be a guiding force, not using force like military, but just being an objective example to follow and influence and so on and so on. So to me, I don't just see China as a victim of US imperialism. I see China as the future, as a growing power of the future of humankind and probably the most advanced civilization of the world today, right? So that's important. On the DPRK, I think DPRK has obviously had many economic problems because of US sanctions in the past few decades. But to me, the DPRK is the sole legitimate bearer of the authentic and independent Korean civilization. So South Korea is a colony of the United States. So to me, North Korea contains the history, the tradition, the how should I say, the the dormant powers of Korean people and Korean civilization. So to me, there is a big future ahead for North Korea. I have a positive, optimistic view. Vietnam, I'm not too familiar with Vietnam. I heard recent news that Vietnam is working toward getting closer to solving its diplomatic issues with China diplomatically and not. I hope they don't collaborate with the United States against China in any of the disputes going forward. I hope they resolve it in a manner befitting of fraternal socialist states. Beyond this, I'm not really that familiar with Vietnam. Finally, on the question of Cuba, I think Cuba is an interesting example because Cuba seems like it's undergoing a lot of changes, but the conservatives, by conservative I mean conservative communists, they are getting the upper hand in Cuba now. Cuba is not liberalizing. It's not becoming, how should I say? It's not going to make concession to the liberal democracy and liberalism and so on. So it's following Xi example in China of doubling down on its communist basis and so on and so on. So I'm glad to see this going on for Cuba. I think we have a very paradoxical time today, right? For many decades, it was believed that this communist states will just open up, and that this is the tide of history, and then they will become more liberal, more democratic. But now we see with the era of Xi Jinping thought, the contrary is true. The tide of history is on the side of those who have moved past liberalism, have moved past this. And there's a rich wealth of development and culture and future for these countries that are cultivating their post-liberal identity. Cuba, communist, China, the communist, North Korea, same thing, and so on and so on. Russia, I'm not a fan of Putin, but to me, Putin is somewhat resisting the West. And also the Communist Party in Russia, I heard, is gaining ground. Putin's scared of them. So that's good news as well. But this post-liberal, post-American, specifically see, to me, Americanism is globalism. Americanism is universal culture, universal values, human rights, so on and so on. We are moving into a post-American era. And to me, American socialist patriotism is geopolitically post-American. We must, as American communists, focus inward, internally. Yes, we must examine and embrace the indigenous Native American. They have a big part to play to shape the identity of America, always have. Also, the Black population, Hispanic, and so on and so on. But we must focus inward and arrive at our own unique, particular civilization or identity or something, right? America can no longer be the universal state. We must be just another state, right? You have Poland, you have France, you have Germany, Britain, Greece, whatever. And we must also have America, just as another country, no longer as the universal America.
Yes, but don't you think that this question about these countries was the analysis of the future, and the reform of Deng was very similar to reform which taken place in Poland few years earlier, in the time of Gierek. And in 1970s, he started to make the Polish economy, socialist economy, was collaborating with the Western banks and Western technologies. And in the first years, it provoked a big growth of the economy. So 1971, 72, 73, 74, the Polish economy was growing very, very fast. But in the time of the crisis in 1979, it's finished. And it was the first crisis in the socialist state, because normally in socialist state the difference between the economic, the socialism and capitalism is that because of the central plan economy in the socialism, there are no something like crisis. In Poland we have crisis in 1979, and a few years later it provoked the counter-revolution in Poland. And do you think that this class of the millionaires or billionaires which are now in China, that they also will try to make counter-revolution or China, or maybe Xi Jinping, he will make something like Stalin in 1929?
It's interesting. So I don't know too much about the Polish history, but to me, was not the economic reform also correspond to a political liberalization? Liberalization.
Oh, in Poland, there was also very active the Catholic Church movement.
Yeah.
So we have the Catholic Church movement, we have the working strike people who are demands in 1980s when they starting to strike in Poland. They wanted the better socialism. They wanted that socialism is socialism, not the economy was in crisis,
Yeah, yeah,
and there was and some things was reserved only for the people from the directors of the parties. So
yeah,
workers were angry, and these workers were manipulated by the anti-communists, by the church. It was the time when the Polish Pope became the Pope, the Pole became a Pope. So a lot of people. It was the time of the big reaction in the time of the ideology. The
yeah,
socialism in 1950s was something popular in the young Poles, because there was a lot of enthusiasm to rebuilding Poland. The Poland was destroyed, and the young workers became a member of the Workers' Party, and they they wanted to build something new which didn't exist before. But from the ideological perspective, in 1980s already socialism is falling. The party is still in the power, but nobody said about socialism. The legitimization of the party, it is patriotism. The legitimization of the opposition, it is anti-communism, Catholicism, will of USA, and stuff like this. But nobody defends socialist system in 1980s.
To me, the central issue, as far as I can see, was Poland did have a liberalization of economy, but it didn't have its own indigenous building up of productive forces and capital. So in China, China had an indigenous basis of capital accumulation after the Great Leap Forward. It separated the peasants from their means of production, and from this, it was able to build up its own national industrial system. Poland, when it liberalized its economy, was still relying on foreign loans to build up its economy, but it didn't have its independent engine engine of the economy. Its independent national industrial base that can survive crisis, right? So I think there's a lot of differences between Poland and China. But granted, there is a kind of class struggle being waged in China now. Now, it's not a class struggle of people clashing on the streets and direct political conflict, but it's an internal structural reform. And we have seen Xi and the Communist Party, they've been very successful. So it's been one sided. But if there will be a form of resistance by a faction of the Chinese ruling class, ruling class, the people who have benefited, the new class, right? Uh, if they are going to resist the structural reform or not, to me is up, and we don't know. We don't know. They so far have not shown, as far as I can see, any major signs, but it's always a possibility. Um, Xi has tremendous popular support within China, so I think the future is open. But I have an optimistic view and want to have the confidence that Chinese dynasties have lasted hundreds and hundreds of years, right? I hope we are out of the 20th century and into an era in which it's possible for the first time the Communist Party may rule for thousands of years. It may rule for many, many centuries to come. Many people speculate China has finally arrived at its breaking point. But what if China has gotten to a point of the party has become harmonious with the Chinese civilization? The period of troubles and turmoil is over, right? The age of civil wars and revolutions and so on and so on. So I hope that's my optimistic view. The Communist Party will be here to stay for many, many centuries to come.
And what do you think about the populist movement in Latin America, the election in Peru, in Bolivia, in Venezuela, last election in Nicaragua, election in Honduras, which was few days ago. In every of these countries, the leftist forces take power. And do you think that this is something like the social democracy from Europe? So it will be normal capitalist system, but a little leftist, or you think that it is chance for changing, that they will try to, I don't know, to make something other than capitalism?
To me, the most important thing is not the economic system per se. One has to have both the geopolitical, sociological, and how should I put it? Kind of civilizational analysis, right? So to me, geopolitically speaking, a difference with a social democracy is an umbrella of U.S. imperialism. It doesn't have a sovereign basis in its own countries, right? To me, this populism within Latin America represents authentic striving to create sovereign power of Latin American power, right? Sovereign from United States, sovereign from foreign capital, sovereign from this. So to me, the most important thing is to build independent industrial and economic base, to no longer be reliant on the United States. Now, experimenting with different social system is then possible, right? First, you must win the sovereignty. You must win this self-determination and win being able to build a state of your own people. Then you have the freedom to experiment with different social systems, right? Some countries in Latin America want to experiment with Bitcoin and so on. We see Venezuela has done socialistic experiments of socialistic forms of ownership and so on and so on. But these are only made possible because they are representing an broader indigenous movement to create the sovereignty of the people in those countries and the civilization. To me, the Latin American movements we should not just see the world ideologically, right? The world is not an ideological conflict between different ideologies. It's also a geopolitical and civilizational conflict. So we should also view Latin American communism within the context of the unique Latin American civilization. What is Latin America? What does it represent? What kind of countries are Latin America? What form of state would they have? What culture? What people? And so on and so on. These are very, very important questions. The communists have been successful in Latin America because they have been the most successful, as in China, as in Soviet Union, so on and so on, in representing this, right? This unique reality. So, to me, Latin America is a kind of mystery to me, right? Because uh, we don't know what we don't know. There's a word multipolarity, right? There's different polarities. We haven't seen what the Latin American polarity looks like, how to think about the national question in Latin America. So it's a very open future. But what I will say is that a big personal inspiration to me and my view of things like populism and so on was Chavismo, Hugo Chavez, his movement. To me, that was the first major inspiration from the real world in defining my own sense of what socialism or communism is or what it means.
And what is your analysis of this question of identity politics, which is very important now to the left in the Western countries?
To me, it's a complete false. It's a complete sham. Not specifically because it doesn't represent anything real. There is a national question in the United States, obviously, with the black population. And yes, there is a lot of derangement and perversion of the so called conservatives who have a pathology against the sexual minorities, right? And we should be opposed to this. But to me, the identity politics, the number one problem is the ideology and practice of intersectionalism, which uses establishments and academia and politically correct bubbles, right, to filter reality in a politically correct way and basically gatekeep movements. To me, intersectionality, this idea that all identity struggles are equal with the class struggle and they have to be mediated, and this doesn't allow any breathing room for an acknowledgement of organic spontaneity of the authentic people and authentic masses. They're trying to create their own fake people in place of the real ones, right? The Communist Party here is the same way. They say, there's this populism is bad. Our populism is better because we are intersectional. But where's your people? It's just you. So we need to recognize material reality of the people, and the working class comes first. If you believe that your LGBT and so on is progressive in the authentic materialist historical sense, then you must have the faith that any anti-LGBT sentiments among the working class are inauthentic and that they can be shown or persuaded or guided to a contrary view than the reactionary view they may have. But you can't dismiss people for having the reactionary view in the first place. It's up to you to show them why the reactionary view is wrong. If you can't do that, maybe your view is the reactionary one and they're correct. It's a matter of what do you really believe here, right? So to me, I like to look at identity politics as opposed to viewing it as a matter of like, we need to, here's the LGBT, here's the women, here's the minorities, I don't like looking at it this way. I like looking at it in terms of problems, right? Why is there such a big fuss over LGBT? Because in a sense, a conventional way that we culturally relate to sexuality has been changed, right? Sexuality is going through a crisis in general. Communists should just be at peace with that fact. We should be at peace with the fact that with the internet and with mass media, and there's no longer a direct sense of familiarity in terms of sexuality and so on. So we should just be reconciled with that fact instead of focusing so much on the symptom. We should get to the root cause, right? And why it is many people have anti-LGBT views is because they're experiencing a turmoil of their own traditional sexual norms and so on and so on. We shouldn't become extreme here and like embrace this turmoil and say this turmoil is a good thing. We should try to find a way to show people they can be at peace with their traditional gender and sexual norms, while at the same time not being threatened by the sexual minorities. So that's my view.
Okay. Maybe do you want to ask something about Poland or France? Because I am living in France. I am not living in Poland. I am in Poland. Me, like thousands of Poles in my generation, we emigrated in the time when the Poland became a member of the European Union. So the many people emigrated because it is easy way to change your salary to a little bigger.
I guess I would ask, among the Polish left, sometimes in some ex-communist states, you see a divide. You see a more pro-American left and a more pro-Russian left. Is this the same in Poland, or?
It's difficult to say that it is divide. I can say that this divide is that 98% is pro-American. So
Okay.
so you in my channel you can find an interview which I made with Mateusz Piskorski. He was a leader of the party Zmiana. It is change in English. And he tried to build the party which wanted to fight that Polish will not be member of NATO, that the American will go from Poland. And he was arrested. He was imprisoned 3 years. He was accused that he is a Russian spy. And still he can't leave Poland because all the time the process is that is trial that 3-4 times a year they are there are something, but so it is very very long procedure. It was from 2016 to 2019. He was in jail. Now he is in his house, but he can't leave Poland. So the most of the Polish left is very pro-American. So if you looked the history of the Poland, it was the time of the rule of the social democracy in 2001-2005, when Poland sent Polish troops to Afghanistan, Polish sent troops to Iraq, Poles decided to build in Poland the prison for CIA. And Poland also was active in the colored revolution in Ukraine in 2004. And so the Polish social democracy is very very active in the supporting imperialism. All the time they are very active. All the time they organize something against Belarus, against Lukashenko. So we have licitation. Which party is the most pro-American? One party which is now in power, PIS, Law and Justice, and the Social Democracy. They try to fight who will be the guy who ruling Poland in the name of the America. And because social democracy have money, because they have structure. So all the medias in leftist medias, which of course are very, very weak. My YouTube channel in Polish language is the same popularity like the social democracy, which is now in parliament. And I don't have money, I don't have sponsor, I don't have money from the state. But it's a problem, because we have corruption. This corruption which existed in Democratic Party, when you have some lefties who wanted to make a career, and if you want to be published like intelligentsia, you have to be in good relation with the social democracy. And social democracy all the time they support this imperialist politic of the USA. And when Piskorski was in prison, everybody were silent about this. Today, when Assange is in prison, everybody is silent. But when the Navalny or the somebody like Protasiewicz in Belarus, they speak about this all the time.
As a foreign observer, right, I see parallels with the American situation, in some kind of way. My view, my impression is that a Polish communism, revived communist movement, has no future among the existing Polish left at all. To me, even Polish left may even be a more dangerous enemy than the populist right. To an extent, populist right is obviously very reactionary, vile, dangerous, and so on. But to me, the probably most important and successful position the Polish communists can adopt is precisely the one that had gotten I imagine he may be your comrade in prison, which is probably why he was put in prison in the first place, because has so much explosive potential to start something, is a populist Polish patriotism against the EU. And that's an important one too, because when economic crisis comes, it's important to blame the EU. EU is important to blame because EU represents Polish being part of the polarity of the Western European countries and Germany specifically. So against the EU, against NATO, and against the presence of US troops. It may be an unpopular position now, but I think it's a firm position that will be able to build some kind of basis. It would probably have to be underground and so on and so on. But to me, this kind of pro-imperialist left within Poland, I imagine more urbanized, more liberal, more elitist, and so on. There's a kind of, I detect, class struggle going on in Poland between the popular masses, countryside, the backward countryside, and so on, who may also represent the legacy of the communist Poland. They probably anti-communist, but life was probably a little bit better under the communism in some respects, maybe, right?
Life in the socialist Poland was much more better than today.
Yeah.
That we had all this question of the housing, of the hospitals, of the schools, and we have work in Poland now. The problem, I am agree with the question of NATO, with the military bases of USA, with all this Western geopolitics. But EU is something different. EU, it is for the Polish working class. It is for me, for example. But people like me, in my age, there are thousands. The truck drivers in European Union, if you go to Germany to the parking in the autoroute, you will see that the half of the trucks, this is the Polish trucks. You will go to the construction, you will see that there are a lot of workers from Poland or from Romania, from other countries. So in the same time when the Polish government and have a lot of wars with the Brussels, with the European Commission, the popularity of staying in EU in the Polish population is very, it is 70 or 80%. So today I am against, when I am speaking with comrades, of course we are against the European Union, but it is not something when we said publicly we
Yeah,
need
yeah.
to fight for Pole exit, because the workers, the neighbor of Poland is Ukraine, and Ukraine is not a member of European Union. And you see that, of course, our salaries is the smallest one in Europe, in European Union, but in Ukraine is worse than in Poland. So
I don't think advocacy for leaving EU would be wise, but maybe uh, Poland has disputes with the EU, like Greece did on briefly with Syriza and so on. If maybe the position should be, we deserve a more fair deal with the EU. We deserve, as Poland, more from the EU. We deserve a better deal. And if it gets to the point of the EU threatens to kick Poland out, by that time, the patriotic sentiment will have become so high, similar to in Greece, that in a referendum, the Poles will probably vote to leave. If you can accelerate this tension to that point, it's not there yet, but in Greece, for example, when they voted in the referendum, it was a matter of patriotic feeling, left or right, didn't matter, right? They voted to leave, to reject the terms created by the European Union for the restructuring of Greek debt. And they said, fuck it, we reject this. And even if it means leaving the EU, yes, so I think,
yes, but
yes,
what was after the referendum?
the betrayal by the Syriza.
Yes, but
Sequence.
after, in the time of the referendum, the Central European Bank will cut money to Greece. So
Yeah, yes, but
1 week without money, and the economy of Greece was totally collapsed. In Poland, so it was the lesson for every country who wants to fight with Brussels. In 1 week we can destroy your economy. So you know that they are bad guys, but how to deal with them it is in the our strategy, because we have the Polish Workers' Party, we are recreated this party which existed in the time of war, and our strategy is take power in Poland in the program of building socialism. And building socialism in Poland, it is something which is impossible in the European Union, because we need to nationalize Polish industry and stuff like this, and it is against the laws of the Maastricht Treaty. So we want to firstly take power, try to build socialism, and in the time with the conflict of EU, say to Polish people, watch, Brussels is against our election, is against socialism. It is why now we can leave, but we have to firstly take power and after leave the EU. If not, there will be, the situation in Poland will be worse than today. For example, I don't know if you know that now we have the theocratical government which ban abortion, make a Catholic priest in every schools, Catholic propaganda, and it is something that now if we leave you and the countries, bourgeois countries like Czech Republic or Netherlands, they allowed Polish women free make abortion. So for the Polish women which are pregnant, the fact that Poland is the member of the European Union, it is something which help to fight with these
Yeah,
theocratic figures.
I understand this. There's a similar view here in the United States. Like, it's better for Joe Biden than Trump in power, right? It is materially, but communists should be thinking in long term. Of course, it would be worse in the short term, but to me, this is the only. I mean, one should not tail behind the right wing forces in Poland, but one should be able to risk creating a hegemonic popular force that is willing to risk leaving the EU even before seizure of power. Like, for example, in the case of Greece, uh, all it would have taken was Varoufakis's parallel payment system, which was going to use the cryptocurrency. There, we are experiencing a currency revolution anyway, right? Which I don't think the EU is going to be able to survive. But all it takes is someone like Varoufakis to be able to implement a risky parallel payment system, and the EU would be totally powerless. The problem is that Tsipras and the other people in Syriza were scared of Varoufakis' plan because they decided that it would be better to just play it safe than to take risks. But revolutionaries must be willing to take risks, right? And do things that have not been done before, take things to territory that's uncharted. When Lenin in the October Revolution, when they pulled out of the war, when they experienced civil war, I mean, the situation of the former Russian Empire was a disaster. It was horrible, famine. Years later, it was a complete catastrophe, right? Because they took that risk. But we see in the long term that it was all worth it, right? With the Soviet Union and so on and so on. So I'm not Polish, so it's not really my business anyway. But just from my foreign limited perspective, I think an attitude of skepticism, or at least willingness to confront the EU, can be combined with a popular communist position even before seizing power. Because this is also something that, to think about, is that if you're a communist in Poland who wants to build socialism in Poland, the question of what about the EU is always going to loom over you. People will ask you, what about the EU? How are you going to do this under the EU, right? When you get in power, by that time, you will have to have given people some kind of message about your stance toward the EU. And like, how are you going to deal with the EU making it not possible, right? So either way, one is going to have to risk fostering anti-EU sentiment, even when we have a reactionary, or you have a reactionary government in power.
Yes, but EU exists not so long. But the western neighbor of Poland, Germany, it is we are the neighbors from 1,000 years. And 1/3 of the Polish territory before Second World War, it was Germany. And after the finish of the war, in this place, in the western part of Poland, there was Soviet troops. So Soviet troops are defending the Poland from Germany, who wanted to take back this land. Now we don't have Soviet army in Poland. Now we have the situation that we have not army at all. In socialist Poland, we have 300,000 army. We had a lot of tanks, a lot of and every Pole was the military service was obligatory for everybody. Now we are totally the army is not existed. We are totally dependent the NATO. And without European Union, there is the danger that the German will take back this land, and nobody stop them because there are not Soviet army. So we will leave the European Union, but in the same time, the Germans say, okay, you leave the European Union, so we will take half of your territory.
Well, if it ever came to that point, you will have already accomplished so much. Like it's good to get to that point. I mean, at that point, you're on the road to making things more interesting. I mean, this is like a scenario from like a strategy game, like. But to be serious, I know it's a serious issue, but the struggle for communism is a tumultuous, dangerous, and risky struggle. I mean, we saw World War II and the invasion by the Nazis of the Soviet Union, and so on and so on. It's a life. It's a world historical struggle whose stakes are even greater than death. It's my view. So one must be able to risk it all, right? And I don't think one should worry about this scenario, because if it ever got to that point, Poland will not. Germany has invaded Poland before, and Poland was not alone in fighting Germany for this reason. And I doubt Poland would be alone fighting Germany again in such a circumstance of territorial annexation. Certainly, others would get involved. Almost certainly. And even beyond then, you would have a patriotic struggle that would undoubtedly be led by communist forces. They would be immortalized as the leaders of the Polish people for centuries to come. So one must risk everything, is my view. But that's just my personal view.
Today, from the I can say, what could be your work to the Polish population, because Poland now is colonized country, colonized in the mental way. So the Polish population are learning English in school. It is obligatory for everybody. We are in Polish television. You have only the American films, videos, series. When they are election in USA, all the time they speak about this in the Polish media. So if one day the communism will be popular in United States, if one day you will take power, your party, your comrades will take power in the USA, we can show the Polish population, you see, we have to make like America is communist, so now we have to fight for communism because we love America. So this is the way how you can help us taking power in your country.
I agree. I think that's a good place to. It's a good note to leave things off on. But it was a great discussion. I think my audience learned a lot from you, and hopefully not the last.
I invite you because today I interviewed you. I asked question. Next time, if you have time, we can organize debate. I will invite some comrades, maybe Professor Drwensky, because I collaborate with here where I am living in France. I have some contact with the academic circles. So is the Professor Drwesky, Professor Anila Croaris, and it's a little. I am not only one here. Okay, comrades, thank you for your time. Very good conversation, and take care.
Thank you so much, and take care.